Finally, we're moving on to the sexy. This is the sizzle. This is where we're going to talk about the actual production. And we're starting first with lighting in scene number 1 or uno. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of advice here. It's going to be short because I know most of my advice tends to be a little bit long-winded. My advice is that, is this even advice? I don't know. I'm just going to throw something at you. Scene number 1, your first scene. Anytime you're setting up for your first scene, whether you're shooting film, whether you're shooting stills, whatever you're doing, it's always going to be the most challenging. It's going to take the most time. You're going to do the most amount of modification and tweaks and so forth. And it's going to be probably the most frustrating because you're going to sit there and looking at the time and you're going to go, oh my gosh, we're over time. Oh my gosh, we should have been shooting 20 minutes ago. Don't worry about it, okay? When you come in and you do this day in and day out, you start to realize that scene number 1, your first setup, is always the one that's going to take the most time because what are you doing? You're trying to discover what works in a particular scene. After you figure that out, after you get scene number 1 set up, then from there it's just modification. And modification going into scene 2 and scene 3 and scene 4 and so forth, it becomes very, very simple. Okay, it becomes very quick. You'll build momentum, you'll build some steam. Don't let it kind of throw off your mojo just because scene 1 doesn't go as quickly as you expect. It's just a thing that happens. So if that bugs you, plan additional time to get scene 1 set up and set. Set up and set. Whatever. All right, so let's jump right in. Now here is the room that we are working in. As soon as I saw this room, as soon as I saw the photo, the first thing I thought was light number 1, okay? Whenever we're doing a setup, here's a tip for you. Whenever we're doing a setup, always, always, always start with one light. Now, how do I know which light to start with? Generally, I'm starting with the main light, but not always. The way to know which light to start with is I always start from the first light. The light is going to basically, the light that is going to define my scene is where I start. For this room, as soon as I saw the picture off of Kaylee's phone, I went, the light that's going to define that scene is the light that's coming through the window. It's the shafts of light that we get coming through the window. It's that ambient light that we're going to get. That is what's going to define the scene. Then we just need to put a light on the model just to brighten her up. But that's what is going to create the overall look. So what do? The first thing I do when we get there is I went outside. I took my trusty C-stand. I put this little adapter right onto it. And I put a flash. The Photex Metros Plus went right onto that C-stand and went outside the window. I angled it in a way where it basically comes straight through the window, almost like sunlight would, okay? What are we trying to do? We're trying to imitate or mimic sunlight. So we're picking an angle that sunlight would be coming in at. Sunlight would not be coming in bottom up. I know a lot of you are like, put the sunlight below the window. No, that's not the way sunlight works. I don't need to explain this to you. I'm just kidding. So we're angling it in a way that is coming through, kind of like how light would typically come through in this scene. Now, when I go back inside, I fire off a test shot. This test shot was at 1/50th of a second at f2 and ISO 800. And it's just my first shot just to take a wild stab at where the exposure should be. I can see that the light is lighting up on the outside and it looks much like daylight. The only thing is that we're getting too much light now. In Lighting 101 and 201, we talk about where if you don't have an image that you like, most likely it's simply because the balance of ambient light to flash is off, okay? I don't like this look here. It's too bright. It lost the ambience. So what do? Well, we stop it down basically. Okay, so I bring it down to 1/200th of a second at f2 and ISO 100. Then we start getting a little closer to this kind of mood that I want to establish, this little sexy mood. I don't know why I use that term so much. Frankly, it's kind of disturbing to me. But we get closer to it, right? So now that light coming through, it has, well, it's a lot darker. We get much less ambient light in the room. This light now almost looks like moonlight coming through because it has this kind of bluish tint to it. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer. Next step, I want to create my light rays, okay? So we start pumping some fog into the room. Now, I think this is someone's head, probably Amanda's head, as she's standing there. All I want to do is just pump some fog into the room and try and get my light rays. I'm adjusting the flash power to get to a level that I need. Most likely for this type of a scene, depending on where my final settings are going to be, it's going to be around 1/4 to 1/8 power on the outside flash. And again, I'm always shooting manual flash power. Why? Because how the heck is ETTL going to know how much light to put out when I'm using this light as just a, light for these shafts of light coming through? I'm not trying to expose for skin tones. I'm not trying to do anything that the camera might know. I'm trying to do something that is very, very different, kind of more on the artistic side. And even if TTL hits it right once, it might not be consistent every single time in the way it pops. So what do? We use manual. Let me just go ahead and dial this speaker down so I don't get messaged the whole time. So we get that shot. I move in a little bit closer. We let the fog dissipate a little bit more, and voila, we start getting shafts of light. In the meanwhile, Kaylee is just doing her thing. She's kind of just dropping all the petals into here, and I'm just setting up. Okay, so as the fog dissipates, now I don't necessarily want this much fog in the room. This is a little bit too much. But I just need to see what thickness of fog, if you will give me shafts of light coming through. And that gives me kind of an idea. Now, once we started kicking fog in here, one small thing happened. The smoke alarm started to go off. Here's the thing, is that typically if you're in a corporate office, the smoke detector items, the little sprinklers, they're based off of heat. But if you're in a home, they're based off of like thickness, or like that little fog in the air, the smoke that's in the air. So it could be set off by steam coming out of the shower. It could be set off by smoke from a cigarette, or it could be set off from our Roscoe fog machine. So we started setting off the smoke detectors, and the quickest way to make them stop, by the way, is to just start wafting them with your reflector. Just clean the air out right in front of it. And once we did that, basically we just said, okay, let's take the smoke detectors off, because they kept going off throughout the shoot. So we just took them off and placed them outside until we were done with the shoot, and then we put them back in. Just a little heads up. That might happen. Don't worry. The house is not coming down in a blaze. Okay, so we get this first light in position. And then once I get there, I place the model in the scene. Okay, now all I'm doing here, and again, this goes back to, I always try and say with boudoir stuff, whenever we're doing fine art boudoir, whenever we're doing general boudoir, whenever we're doing implied nudes, I always want to keep the model comfortable. Part of this is doing certain things. Like if I can have her in a robe, I'm going to have her in a robe. If we're doing implied nudes, I'm going to let her have pasties on. I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep her comfortable, because nobody's going to be comfortable just sitting there nude in front of you while you're testing the lights. So be kind of considerate in that. So in these shots, we always have pasties on her. She always feels comfortable. She's not exposed to us as we're just going through and testing. But what am I going for right now? I'm trying to figure out right now, what does this room and what does this scene look like now with my primary light? Remember, the primary light in this is our light that sets the scene, that sets the mood for the entire shot. After that, I tried a couple different things. I thought, well, maybe I can use this little bounce card, and maybe I can bounce some of that light coming through the window into the model's face. We tried that for a brief moment. It didn't work. Why? Because we weren't getting enough light from the white card and from the reflection into her face to brighten her up adequately. Okay, so we need to do something else. So I kind of start shooting a couple different angles just to see where I want to go with it. We're at 1/200 at f2 and ISO 200. This is probably the setting that we're going to be using even for the final shots. Let's go ahead and take a look. Yeah, so our final shots have that setting. So what do I do here is I basically define my setting for the overall ambient look, okay? We get there at 1/200 at f2 and ISO 200. We're there. This is what I want the ambient light to look like. But my model is not what I want looking like, as far as lighting wise goes. So I know that I need to kick some light into her to get her brightened up. So what do? Well, I start first with my Westcott, okay? We start with the Apollo strip and we place it, and I realized, number one, I forgot my diffuser, which was a little bit of an issue. I can always use a 5-in-1 reflector. You can open it up and you have a scrim inside of it, so you can use that to diffuse light. So I wasn't worried about that. But I popped a grid on it, I put it on a stand, and then immediately, the first thing I realized when I placed it into position was that I couldn't get it into the right position, okay? Why? Because the room is absolutely tiny. This is the scene challenge that we talked about before. The room was so small that I couldn't get it over to I need it right where that wall is, basically, and I couldn't get it right to where this wall was. I can get it against the wall, but that wasn't the same. I would need the room to be like 2-3 feet bigger to get that, to get the Westcott Apollo or any softbox into position. So you can see that the light angle, we're getting more of a split light right from right here. And also, we're going to need a lot of diffusion because I forgot the diffuser for this the softbox. And also, the distance between the model and the softbox is fairly close, okay? It's just sandwiched right there in between the toilet and the wall, basically. So we're going to need diffusion because that's too harsh of a light. So I kind of thought, let's see, can we deal with this? And I thought, not really. I didn't want to continue to deal with having to try and make that work and trying to keep working into position. So how could I get a light onto the angle of that wall? Well, the next thing that popped in my head, which this is why we teach things like Lighting 101. Lighting 101 is light shaping via on-camera flash. But the techniques and the tips used in Lighting 101 you can use in every type of scene and shoot. And knowing those things, going into this shoot, it was like, okay, well, all I'm going to do now is just place my little, we're going to place this guy right up against the wall. So now I can flatten this against the wall, right? So now this is a light source that's coming from where the wall is. If this were a softbox, the wall would need to be 3 feet behind where it was to fit that softbox. But with this white card, I can place it right up against the wall. So this is right up against the wall. And then all I do is I place an inside flash on my Manfrotto stand, and I pop the grid onto it. Now the grid prevents light from spilling everywhere, right? We know that from Lighting 101, Lighting 201, all those things. So that prevents light from spilling out. So all I do is I angle that light directly into that soft card that's coming off the wall, and now we have a light source coming from where the wall is. And it's nice and white, it's nice and soft, it's already diffused because it's a white material. And we get to basically our very first set of images. So right here, I think right about here is when we got that in position. I kicked up too much fog, but you can see the white is in position now. And you can see how it's coming from just this perfect angle where now we're getting a little bit of wrap on this side. We're getting a beautiful Rembrandt slash kind of loop light on our face. And it looks absolutely amazing. Okay, now it's going to come down to getting the right white balance. So what am I doing here? My white balance is kind of looking blue. Again, anytime something's not looking quite right in camera, just adjust the white balance. You know, I don't want to go through this entire thing. I don't want to go through an entire shoot. I am shooting raw. I'm shooting raw plus JPEG almost always. But I don't want to go through an entire shoot guessing what it's going to look like. I want to adjust my white balance in camera to kind of the look and feel that I want it to have in post-production. That way I know that I'm getting the right result. So just simply click the white balance. The easiest way to do this, guys, is to go into the live view. Go into the live view so that you're actually looking at the scene. Let me go ahead and adjust this down so you can actually see. You're actually looking at the scene, and then simply click your white balance button and adjust it. So I just adjusted to be warmer. Let's go ahead and see what setting we went to on that because I'm not sure exactly where we're at. Okay, let's go to see where we went to. I think it looks like 5,500 to 6,000. Yeah, 5,500 Kelvin is where we went to, okay? So here it was just on the cool side. Most likely I had finished shooting something the previous night and we were doing something with a CTO gel. So it's very cold at 3,400. So then I just brought it up. And we start getting this beautiful look. I mean, look at how when you compare these two images, you could possibly think that you're completely off, right? You'd look at the image on the left and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's wrong with this scene. Oh my gosh, this isn't looking the way I want it to. I want it to have this beautiful feel to it. And in reality, everything is right. It's just your white balance that's off. And while it's something that you can tweak in post, you might not ever get to the right image if you don't do it in camera because you wouldn't know you're already there. Okay, so get the white balance right in camera so that way you can gauge the light and do everything in camera and get it to where you want. All right, let's pull back up this right side right here. Okay, let's start looking through. So now we're getting to basically what we want to do. Now we're trying to fill the room up with a little bit more fog and get the right level of fog in there. We're trying to kind of perfect everything, get that light to the right balance. So what our goal is right now is we're trying to fill with, the strange thing is that things like fog are going to affect the way light works, right? Because if you fill a room with fog, it fills it with like this kind of, these air particles, right? These air particles are, why do I keep saying right? As if you guys could actually agree with me. I don't know. These air particles are actually going to bounce light. And that means it's going to change the way light looks. You're going to get fill light because it's bouncing off these particles and going in the shadow areas. It's also going to affect it a way that works like in more the main light areas, in the areas that our light is actually hitting. It could be brighter depending on the amount of fog in the room. Generally, it's going to be a little bit darker because it's absorbing, the fog is absorbing a little bit of that light. If it's very light and so forth, then it's not going to be a big difference. But the thicker it gets, kind of the darker it's going to look overall, and you're going to get less of that light. So as we're kind of kicking, we realize, okay, this is a little bit too much fog. The fog is actually noticeable at this point. So we keep working and we keep fanning just a little bit, letting it air out. And we finally get to this beautiful right mixture where we have these light shafts coming through the window. And this is our first shot. So you can see that this is our first flag shot. I like this shot too. But it still had a little bit too much. So it's just a matter of waiting for it to dissipate just a little bit more. I don't want it to look like she's smoking a cigarette in the room, okay? I want it to look like just a bit of ambience. So we wait just a little bit more, 1/200 of a second at f2, ISO 200. Again, you can probably guess that my background flash is around 1/4 to 1/8 power. Actually, it's most likely probably around 1/4 power. And then my internal flash that's going off that white side is probably around 1/4 to 1/8. Okay, so we're probably around that mixture. The background is going to be a little bit brighter than the foreground, so it's going to be 1 to 2 stops above whatever we have in the foreground. So just kind of play with that mix a little bit. Don't rely on TTL. Why? Because TTL is not going to give you consistent results. It might get you there 90% of the time. But what I want to do is when I get this into Lightroom, I want to just process everything together and just have it all be the same tonality and everything. And small shifts in Flash mean that you're going to have to work on those images individually rather than batch process them. Okay, so that's how we basically got to scene number 1. So what is scene number 1? We have our flash on the outside on a C-stand that's firing straight through the window. Remember, when the flash is outside and you're firing it through a window like that, zoom it in. We have it zoomed in at 105 millimeters, so that way the light's not spilling and wasted all over outside the walls and so forth. The light on the inside, again, I have zoomed in and it's firing through a grid and it's bouncing off of that white card, so we get this beautiful soft light. Now, in looking at these images, you might notice something here. What do you notice? There's a little bit of a lighting problem here. And if you said there's a shaft of light on her shoulder and wrist, you're absolutely right. By about the 3rd shot, I recognized, I saw, it went a little bit further. I think I didn't see it until this spot. And this is, again, a reason why you might want to shoot on tethered, because tethered, everything blows up bigger so you can see it very closely. Otherwise, just zoom in. But very quickly into this, I kind of realized, you know what? I don't necessarily like that shaft of light that's coming through. And I pinpointed it. It was just that the curtains were open a little bit right here. So we just closed the curtains just a little bit, and then it eliminated that shaft of light that was coming through. Okay? So that's it for the overall lighting setup in this scene. Let's go ahead and move to the next video where we're going to talk about the posing, the camera angles, and the actual shooting process. Welcome to the Earthen Bathtub Fine Art Boudoir Premium Shoot Tutorial. Now in this shoot, we're going to take you through 4 complete scenes. We're going to create an entire product from start to finish. That means that we're starting with the planning of our boudoir shoot, how we created the mood board and kind of the overall concept that we're going for. We talk about the gear and